what we're overlooking right now is 10 acres of Capitol Square. And the reason the city of Columbus is here is because of that 10 acres. The early settlement in Columbus, we'll talk about it when we go along the river, but obviously there was settlement here dating back 2,000 years. This was not an undiscovered place, and I think that's part of what we're talking about through this whole process. A lot of the names, the very name of Ohio is taken from an indigenous name. So there are lots of place names that are here. I guess there probably are a lot of people who live in this city who have no clue where the names came from. But this was open land here. There was, in 1797, Lucas Sullivan came, purchased property. On the west side of the Scioto River is the Virginia Military District. And what that was, the state of Virginia had claim to part of Ohio before it became a state, and it was for people who had fought in the Revolutionary War. Their payment was land before this was a state. So that has a very different history than this side of the river, which was not part of the military district. This was part of refugee lands, which was similar. People who were displaced or fought in the Revolutionary War got land. But this was not settled. And there was this little area called Franklinton that we'll walk around today, or walk over to. 1797, very, very small settlement. Ohio became a state in 1803, first state in the Northwest Territory, which is important because a lot of what happened in states as the country expanded was taken from what started in the Northwest Territories. Anybody know the 5 states in the Northwest Territories? Come on, Columbus people. Michigan's one. Ohio.
Pennsylvania?
No. Indiana. Illinois. One more.
No.
Nope.
No.
Wisconsin.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, so you kind of envision this part of the Midwest. It's east of the Allegheny. That's why Pennsylvania, people were actually able to get over the mountains and start expanding. This is where the westward expansion of the U.S. really got started. So there were some men across the river who owned land on this side of the river, and they made an offer to the state of Ohio and said, we'll give you 10 acres and we'll even build a couple of buildings that will be state buildings that we'll give to you if you make that site the capital of Ohio. And at that time, the capital was in Chillicothe in Ross County. Then it went to Zanesville for a while, but we didn't have a permanent state capital until 1812. And the state legislature said it was going to be there. And that's when it got its name Columbus. And we're still trying to figure out if the state named Columbus or if Lucas Sullivan and his people named it. We'll try to get that answer. I don't have that answer right now. But that 10 acres is the original 10 acres today. We will be walking around Capitol Square. It is the center of Columbus. That intersection, Broad and High Streets, that is where all the numbering system in the city starts. It's the 100% corner of Columbus. But what we're going to do is take a walk, because early on, major buildings were located around Capitol Square. And the first city hall actually was above the North Market, which is gone now, but was a couple of blocks off Capitol Square. The second one was located, you'll see the Ohio Theater better when we're walking around, because we'll get close to it. That's where the second city hall was, and it was burned. It burned down in the 1920s, and the Ohio Theater replaced it. But that was the opportunity to move it to the riverfront. And when we get to the riverfront, we'll talk about how that civic center developed, because that's a really important part of the history and the physical environment and the identity of Columbus. There will be one view you'll have that if you see an article about Columbus in any magazine, any newspaper, on TV, it will be from this one spot that's kind of the iconic view of the city. So part of what we want to show you today and talk to you about is early history, early 20th century history, what we have today, a lot of the interpretation of the history of Ohio and Columbus occurs just in a few blocks. And that's something to kind of think about. It's open space. It is the heart of the city. It's also the heart of the state of Ohio, which gives us an incredible opportunity, not just to impact Columbus, but to impact the entire state and what the state takes away from the work that we do here. So having said that, I just wanted you to kind of see that we're, right now, this is like, their offices are in the best spot in the city. And this fantastic view. So just as an overview, we're going to go down, we're going to walk along Broad Street, we'll point out a few things along the way, see where City Hall is, see where the Columbus statue stood originally, and then we'll cross the river. And when we're in the river, you get a better view of what the Civic Center actually is, what that means architecturally, physically, the open space, the land, the parkland. We'll cross over in front of Old Central High School, now the Center of Science and Industry, so you get a better view back toward the main part of the city. Cross the bridge, go to the departments. It was called the Departments of State building. It's now the Supreme Court Judicial building. And we'll look at the art. It has a lot of public art, contemporary as well as historic. So we'll take a look at the exterior, go in and take a look. Then we're going to come up here, and that Huntington building, that big tall building, we're going to have a coffee break. But from there, you get a view of the State House. We'll talk about the McKinley Monument and why it's facing out. We're going to walk around. There's another Columbus statue on the Capitol, on State House grounds. We'll look at some of the monuments around the State House and then go in the State House. So that's kind of the plan for today. It will take some time because we're going in places. We have to go through security in 2 locations. The Supreme Court's in session today, so they said it might take a little longer. It's a little like going through airport security. You can keep your shoes on, but it's, metal detectors. So any questions? Ask questions along the way, okay? If you have any questions at all, we don't always know the answers, and if we don't know them, we'll get them and get back to you.
Nancy mentioned one thing quickly was the refugee lands. There's an interesting story behind that. There's a whole book on the surveying of Ohio just before and after statehood and how the land was divided up. The refugee tract ended at the Saddle River. It was 5 miles north to south and about 40 miles to the east. And it was named that because it was land awarded to citizens of Canada who had supported the United States in its separation from England, and they were kicked out of Canada. They became refugees. They were awarded this land. Most of them did not come here and settle. They had land warrants that they sold to other people, and then the land went to others. But just that aspect of how the land was divided up early is really a fascinating part of the story of the state.
The one other thing I wanted to mention before we go, somebody brought up yesterday about the new World Heritage Site located in Ohio. I just wanted to give you a sense of what it is and how significant this is. First of all, the United States has, guess how many World Heritage Sites? Anybody want to take a guess? 10. 10. So this is one of the 10 most important sites in the United States, this designation. More important, there are only, it's like up there with the pyramids in Egypt and the Great Wall of China. This is a big deal. This isn't like the National Register or a local historic designation. This nomination took almost 25 years to get to the point where there was documentation and to actually have it approved. And I just wanted to mention that the timing goes back 2,000 to 3,000 years is what people are saying now. Archaeologists are still working on this. But Ohio has the largest number of mounds from this time period of anywhere in the world. So think about that history too as we're doing this. The 3 different sites were included in this nomination, and I want to get the title of it right. It's the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks is the name of the listing, and it includes 3 sites, the Newark Earthworks, which are in Newark, about 35 miles to the east. Fort Ancient in Warren County, which is southwestern Ohio, and the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park in Ross County, which is about 45 miles south of Columbus along the Scioto River. So it's along the same valley. I think this designation, it will raise the awareness of this period of history. I think it will change the way Ohio history is taught. I sure hope so, because this was never taught when I was in school. And I think it will bring people, because people travel internationally to World Heritage Sites. So it's not just going to bring visitors from close by. This is an opportunity for Ohio to really celebrate this heritage. So I just wanted to let you know what that meant. This took place just a few months ago. The meeting was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Chief Glenna Wallace of the Eastern Shawnee actually made the presentation to this world, it's UNESCO, made the presentation. So she's located in Oklahoma, and I think somebody was talking about Oklahoma the other day. That's where they're located, representing the indigenous people of the United States as part of this application. So that's what it meant, and I think it's a really big deal. In a very long time in the making. And even after doing all that research, there was no guarantee UNESCO would approve it. So it was quite exciting. The Ross County sites are owned by the National Park Service. The site in Newark is owned by the Ohio History Connection, which actually started out as an architectural and archaeological society in the 1880s. So they've been after this for a long time. This is our 100% corner, and I wanted to point out our newest work of public art. And honestly, during the day, it's hard to see, but last night it looked fabulous, lit up. So if you have a chance to see it at night, it's hanging over the street, and it was a public-private partnership. So it was actually commissioned and paid for by the owners of the buildings to which it's attached, but it's owned. The artwork is now owned by the Columbus Museum of Art that will maintain it. It's entitled Currents by Janet Eppelman. And it's actually, if you get up close to it, I had to write this down because I would never remember, 78 miles of twine woven into 500,000 knots. And I'll tell you, getting it up took like 2 days. So it'll be interesting to see how it's maintained. But you can take a look at it later on your own. It's the first time anything has been hung over a street, so that was a big deal for the city to approve that. But the idea is that there will become more artwork from the riverfront through Gay Street and making that more of an art corridor. So there's some private planning going on around that idea. We're at Columbus City Hall. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about the development of this building. I mentioned that the earlier City Hall from the 1920s was torn down, and it happened to coincide at a time that there was talk about moving government buildings to the riverfront. Actually, starting in 1908, there had been a move all along to beautify the riverfront. It was a working river. It was not very attractive. By the way, it was never a navigable river. So it was like just, industry was just dumping waste into the river. So there was talk about it, but it was the opportunity to start moving buildings to create this riverfront civic center. The city was it was interesting. Instead of selecting a single architect from Columbus, because there were some really prominent Columbus architects during that time period, these architects, a whole group of them came together and formed the Allied Architects of Columbus. So they would all get the commission, and they did. And so originally the building was designed as a U, and this back part facing Front Street, that's Front Street, was actually open. And from the interior, you can kind of see some of that exterior that was a courtyard. And then that was enclosed later. So it was always designed to be a really important building. And when you're in a capital city, there's always this dynamic between the State House and the Capitol and your city government. This is interesting because that's a state building across the street. And they're all state buildings up and down and a federal building. So it really was very much designed to bring all that public architecture together. The Columbus statue stood on that pedestal with the two trees. So that was its original location. From the time it was installed in 1955. The artist was Italian. It was a gift from the citizens of Genoa. They had a large send-off party of thousands of people. Ironically, it came on a ship called Cristoforo Colombo, which is Christopher Columbus in Italian. It was an Italian ship. The artist, it was dismantled and brought in a number of big crates and shipped by rail from New York, where it landed, and reassembled on the site. The artist was here to supervise the reassembly, and it was dedicated in 1955 on Columbus Day. And there's a photo of about 100,000 people attending that event. So it was a pretty significant event for the city of Columbus when that happened. For many, many, many years, every Columbus Day, there was a parade and a wreath would be, they'd have a ceremony here. But that's kind of where it stood. And really, there are a few monuments around Capitol Square, mostly having to do with, flags, but also police and firefighters and that kind of thing. So it is not going back there. I don't know if anything will go there. There's been talk about doing something else. I don't know if that will happen. I think there are 19 states that have a city named Columbus. This is by far the largest city named after Columbus. And it was the first sister city relationship Columbus had with Genoa. And it was made as a gift in recognition of that sister city relationship, which was kind of a new concept. A lot of that came about after World War II, the idea of partnering with cities in other places. Columbus now has 10 sister city relationships, literally all over the world. But Genoa was the first one. This is the Scioto River, and the name is actually a Wyandot name, and it means deer. DEER, because Ohio was heavily, heavily forested before it became really, completely settled, turned into agriculture and big, 19th century development. So that name has, you always know if somebody's not from Columbus, they call it Scioto because that SC is kind of an odd combination. But that is the meaning of the word. And one of the things that's wonderful about language, it's very descriptive. Ohio, or OYO, which was the name, meant beautiful river, and it referred to the Ohio River. So they're kind of descriptive names. Right upstream, you can see a bridge, a railroad bridge. Just beyond that is where the Olentangy River joins the Scioto. And then the Scioto goes all the way to the Ohio River. So it's not navigable, but it's a very important river. And there were dozens, hundreds of settlements along this river corridor. And significant ones. So I think that that indigenous language comes through. The other is the Olentangy River. It came from the Delaware, and the next county north is Delaware County, that another indigenous name and tribe. It was named because there was shale along the river, and shale was used for all kinds of implements. And Ohio has a lot of shale, which was one of the reasons why there was so much settlement here. But I saw in 1833, the Ohio General Assembly, so this is 30 years after becoming a state, passed legislation to restore original names for these rivers back to their names, not new rivers, not new names for them. It's kind of interesting in 1833 that they even cared about that. So these place names are really, really important. I want to talk a little bit about what happened along this river. So this bank was literally industry, right down to the river. This is the low side of the river that was always flooding, and it flooded from the beginning. The high side, and High Street is called High Street, and you can see there's a little bit of an incline, but that was safe from flooding. There was a massive flood throughout Ohio in 1913. It was in March of 1913. About 1,000 buildings in Franklinton were destroyed. People were killed. It was the largest natural disaster ever in the city of Columbus. And it was really after that this idea of creating a different kind of a riverfront came through. Any of you who've studied history of city planning also know about the City Beautiful movement. I don't have to go into that a lot, but actually came from the World Columbian Exposition in 1992, which was the 400th anniversary. 1893, I'm sorry. But the idea of civic space, compatible architecture, water features, parks, green spaces connecting it. So the first building built, according to that plan, is across the river, Central High School. It's the only building in the Civic Center built on the west bank of the river. And remember, it was floodplain, so it's kind of surprising they actually built that. And just looking from here, where those new buildings are, that was where the Ohio Penitentiary was. The next building here, the kind of sandstone, that's a federal courthouse. The building next to it with the green roof in front of the taller building was the Columbus Police Station, Columbus City Hall. And then we have the Supreme Court building in the 1930s, which is the tall building. The two smaller stone buildings flanking it were built in the 1960s for state offices. All the way over, you see those tall buildings, and there's that little short building that has 4 towers. That was, it's now the Cultural Arts Center and has been since 1978, where art classes are taught by the Columbus Recreation and Parks Department. That was the Ohio Arsenal, dating from about the Civil War period. So when you stood here, this was pretty much all government space. Now, one of the things that was done to prevent flooding was to narrow the channel of the river and to build retaining walls. So you'll see, and we'll walk along it later, but you'll see there are retaining walls in front of that building where Civic Center Drive is. All of this land is reclaimed land just recently to make it parkland.
To get a sense of where those walls were, if you look back here, you can see that low balustrade.
Yeah.
That went vertically down, and the water of the river lapped right up against that wall. So it really was a widening of the river to get a larger channel to accommodate future floods. And it worked really well because there was a flood in 1959, but it went into Franklinton, the original settlement, that area.
Poor Franklinton.
And did more damage. Since then, as of 2004, they finished a flood wall, federally funded flood wall about 7 miles long that now protects that area. And that's the reason the Trinidad Hotel is there and all that other development. It's now safe to build on the west side of the river. And that's made a huge difference.
It really lagged behind the city for so long because of the flooding. In the spring, actually, when there's a lot of rain, you'll see this is designed to take flooding, and it does get flooded a little bit, but it's all, it's designed for that. So this has become, a lot of festivals are held here. The Arts Festival on the 4th of July, the 3rd of July, Red, White, and Boom, where hundreds of thousands of people come for 4th of July. So this has become a real celebration center and something closely identified with Columbus. This is a really important area for people. Lots of trails, and during COVID, there was more activity down here than there was anywhere in any of these office buildings, because it was one of the few places people living downtown could walk. I should mention, in front of those new residential, that's all residential, is North Bank Park. And at the opposite end, which is under construction now, where the Cultural Arts Center is Millennium Park. So it's also bookended by 2 public parks with facilities, fountains, beautiful spaces.
And the Santa Maria was right there.
And the Santa Maria was right on that side of the river, beneath the bridge. And it was a reconstruction, and it confused people because people thought Christopher Columbus actually sailed to Columbus. So
Up the river, up this
non-navigable river. So we're just walking, and we walk across this bridge a lot, and we just noticed here, I'm sure, are the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and the medallion that we hadn't noticed before. So I'm not sure what all of. I need to look at all of them.
Was this bridge rebuilt in '92?
Yes. And all three bridges have been rebuilt. They all dated from the 20s, the Civic Center design, and they've all been rebuilt and replaced. And this was probably the fourth bridge on Broad Street. The first one was a little wooden covered bridge. Yeah. The big thing that came out of the 1992 celebration was actually in Franklin Park on the east side. It was called Ameriflora. It was a huge international flower show. This side of the river is Genoa Park. Again, a nod to that sister city relationship. I want to point out our newest museum in Columbus. This is the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. And thanks to an Ohioan, John Glenn, who really wanted very much to have something like this happen. A lot of people made it happen. It was actually developed by the Columbus Downtown Development Corporation. It is really an interesting museum. It's told from the viewpoint of the experience of being in the military and being a veteran, as opposed to all the generals and all the battles and all of that. It's a very moving, incredible museum. So it replaced what was called Veterans Memorial, which was lots and lots of cities put up these veterans memorials at various times, some right after World War I. This one dated from the 1950s, so it was after World War II in Korea even. So anyway, it's a very important addition to the city. And if you had been here on Sunday, there were hundreds. The whole grassy area was filled with American flags. They do a very interesting program, particularly on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. They take it very, very seriously, and it's very moving. So that's an important new site here along the riverfront.
Can I add just one thing?
Sure.
It's also the only museum in the country that is for all the conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
All the other memorials and tributes around the country are for specific wars. This is for the people who fought the wars. And so that's the thing that makes it stand out nationally as a museum. It's the only veteran-focused museum in the country.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful, you can walk up part of it if you've got free time, those of you staying in Franklinton. There's a beautiful rooftop ceremonial area that is somewhat open, even when it's not open to the public. So.
And there's a memorial garden in the back, which is a much more
Really?
Contemplative space that you can just walk around the building if you want to go over and explore that.
It's free as well.
Yeah.
This summer there was a major air show in Columbus at what used to be Rickenbacker Airport, used to be the Air Force Base. And the Blue Angels were in town, the Navy flying team, all of the Blue Angels, all of the pilots, all of the support crews, something like 150 people. They did a presentation, and anybody there then just mingled and met them. It was a really fascinating experience.
We got to meet the first female Blue Angel pilot. Yeah, I had no idea she was the first one. Okay, so this is a Franklinton, founder of Franklinton, Lucas Sullivan. It commemorates the Great Flood on the back. This is relatively new. It was dedicated in 2000. And yes, Jeff mentioned Sullivan was a surveyor for the federal government, and they were doing surveys before they sold land, and he got quite a bit of it. So he owned all the way up to what's the Hilltop now. So a significant percentage of what was the historic city of Columbus was owned by him. This was pretty much undertaken by there's a little historical society here in Franklinton. Franklinton started as a separate settlement. It wasn't actually annexed to the city of Columbus until about the 1870s. So it took a long time for it to actually, it was always kind of seen as a separate place, and they do have their own historical society. So this amphitheater area is used a lot, and it has a really nice view of downtown Columbus. You'll notice that there is a deer sitting there. There is another one reclining in the trees there. And the third one is going to be on the Rich Street Bridge that we're going to cross. And remember I said Scioto was the word for deer. So that's a nod to that. Although I think people just like the deer and have no idea why, because I don't think it's interpreted.
It is.
Is it? Do they have signage or
No,
something?
not on the signage, but the artist is Terry Allen.
Terry
Allen.
Allen. This is kind of the connection with all that development that's happening behind us. And I have to say, if we don't go to Franklinton for a month, there's a new building there. And it's becoming more artists that moved out of the short north and other places where they get priced out. I don't know how long they're going to be able to hang on in here. But it is the oldest area of the city. And this is kind of the connection between the main downtown and what all this new development that you're seeing here today. And there's still some houses left, but it's turning into more density. Okay, here's our third deer. And this one, if you see photos of Columbus, this is what you see. There are 3 bridges here. That's the Main Street Bridge, and it connects with the park that's closed now for some reconstruction. This was the retaining wall before the river was narrowed, the channel was narrowed, and all that land was reclaimed for parkland. So this was really the retaining wall that was put in 1918 when the Civic Center construction started. I want to point out, if you turn around, you see this giant gavel. This building was designed as a generic state office building in the early 1930s. It became the state Supreme Court and judicial building in the early 2000s. And the artwork on the building, some of which we'll see today, really tells the history of the city and really of Ohio from 1933 perspective. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But one of the things that the Chief Justice, Tom Moyer, and the building's named after him, wanted to do was change its image as an area where the judicial system for the judicial branch of government for Ohio is situated. So that giant gavel, they're reflecting pools at the north and south ends that are original to the building. And 2 local artists were commissioned. Andrew Scott, who now teaches at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, but he was teaching at Ohio State at the time, created the gavel. So when you go by, you know that looks like this might be a court of some kind in the reflecting pool. And we'll actually walk up. You can't see Malcolm Cochran, another local artist, professor at OSU. His is much more subtle. Both of those major commissions were actually funded through the Ohio Bar Association Foundation, as was some additional artwork in the building. But that's up in the Supreme Court Library, which is at the top of the building, which used to be a state library, Supreme Court Library. We could spend an hour and a half in that building. We don't have that much time, but if you ever want a complete tour, we'll take you on it. But what we're going to do, we're going to look at some of the artwork on the exterior of the building, walk up, and then we enter it from Front Street over there. Just to show you, almost every feature of this building has some art or some inscription or something, I would say, to reflect either the history of Ohio or some aspiration generally for peace, for labor, for education, for a number of different things. One of the things I find fascinating about this building was built in the 1930s, and you see up there the Cataclysm of Nations. That was World War I. Wasn't called that because nobody knew. They couldn't imagine in the 30s that there would be a World War II and the same generation of people might fight in it. But also, if you look, it's a lot of it is a tribute. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But this building, we worked on the restoration project of this with the architects. At one point, we went around and looked at all the inscriptions. It was amazing how much was kind of baked into the design of the building. There were 10 artists from mostly Ohio, but not just Ohio, who were commissioned to create murals, metal, a decorative metal, murals, just a lot of different artists involved. So this is called Civic Center Drive. This is the Civic Center Drive entrance. We are not going in here, but this is a visitor's entrance when tour groups come. But I wanted to point this out because we will see the lobby on the other side of it. It is referred to as the Native American lobby. I understand now that's probably not how we ought to refer to it, but that is what it was designed to be. This is the second sculpture that was commissioned when it became the Supreme Court building. And this looks so simple. You know, it's stone, it has words. This is a reflecting pool. And there was an incredible amount of time spent getting the height right, because what happens when there's water in here, the water flows over this. So it's not like these pop up above the water. The whole idea is it's sometimes blurred. And these are all words that have to do with the idea of justice. And I will tell you, he submitted, 25, 30 words to the Bar Association Foundation so they could approve the words that would go in there. So it was designed so you could see it from the buildings around it. And it looks kind of stark right now. It's really cool when there's snow and you see a little bit of it, but it's best seen when there's water. And he actually had them fill the pool so he could get it just a fraction of an inch below the water. And it really is quite, especially if you see it from up above, because the water flows, because these are all jets that push water out. So it's not a still reflecting pool. There's moving water in it. So this is just another example. We're going to go into the building now. I'm going to use my ID, and I don't think you'll have to pull out your IDs here. I think you might have to do it at the State House, but I'm going to kind of run ahead. Take your time. I know. I got permission to bring a group through to look at the concourse, the Native American lobby, and one of the hearing rooms. And they said we only had to have one ID. Oops. Just look again. You know, the other side was all about kind of war and I see this side as a little more aspirational, but you'll notice up here, it represents some of the industries in Ohio: quarrying, fishing, and petroleum, it goes along, education, morality, and just some of the symbolism, some of the, they do include the arts. I'm happy, arts and science, just more of detail in this building. And if you ever have time, do come back by yourself and look at it. You are able to go in anytime. You can even go in if you get here early and observe the Supreme Court in action, which would be interesting. But let's take a look at this plaza. A giant stainless steel gavel. And this is a reflecting pool also. So they actually look best when water's in them. But I think this really showed people that this was a different building than it had been before. There was actually a proposal back before it was decided to turn it into the Supreme Court, a proposal to take out all the reflecting pool, all the marble, and to put picnic tables in. It looked like a backyard deck. So thank God Tom Moyer had the good sense to just say, you're not messing with that building. That's going to be the Supreme Court. I wanted to point out Zanesville and Chillicothe were the two early capitals, temporary capitals of the state before Columbus was selected. I think actually why they picked Columbus was there was nothing here. And instead of competition among cities, it's almost dead center in the state. So geographically, it kind of worked, but I think the idea that they could just start from scratch was probably, and it was basically a real estate deal. They were given 10 acres and the guys across the river said, we'll build your first state building. So I think it just was an easy compromise.
Zanesville was named for Ebenezer Zane, who in 1796 slashed out a trail from Wheeling, what became Wheeling, Virginia, later West Virginia, down to Maysville, Kentucky, on the Ohio River. It went in a big arc. It's called Zane's Trace. It's partly U.S. Route 22 now, Zanesville, and down through southeastern Ohio. And Chillicothe is a restatement of the name of a indigenous settlement. It was the first capital. There's a reproduction of the first Capitol building in downtown Chillicothe that's still in use. I forget how it's used, but
It's a newspaper office.
newspaper office.
Yeah. And Chillicothe's in Ross County, which is where one of the sites where the National Historic Park is, that was part of that World Heritage designation. So it's a really significant area too. This was actually the first Christopher Columbus statue in Columbus. And it was commissioned by the Josephinum. If you're from Columbus, you'll know it's it's actually a seminary that's under direct control of the Pope. And it was commissioned for their campus I'm trying to think, it was 1892. And in 1932, they moved the campus and they donated it to the state of Ohio, which is why it has 1932 on one of these faces. Then in 1992, this whole installation was modified, as you can see, as part of that 1992 celebration. And if you look at it, it's kind of interesting because it's really shaped with the idea of discovery. And I know that's like, discover what? It's the big question we were talking about yesterday. But if you look at the bottom of it, it has discover all the way around. That it has the various dates: 1492, the 1932, the 1992. The State House has always had a number of monuments and memorials, and one of the things that happened, the State House was entirely restored. It's a National Historic Landmark. It's considered one of the best 2 or 3 Greek Revival buildings in the United States. It was the result of an architectural competition in 1838. And the exterior was completed. And it housed all of state government. That's all of it could fit in there at one time. And state government moved in. The original State House was located right on that corner, right up against the street, a tiny little building. And there are photos of that building with this rising behind it. There was a fire, so they moved in, but the interior was not completed yet. And during the Civil War, not much happened. So much of the interior actually dates from about 1870, so it took a while to complete the interior. But the restoration of the building took over 10 years, and it is truly a restoration in the sense that there was a huge amount of research done. There were all the decorative paint was uncovered, the original paint color, the original plans. It's truly a high quality restoration. It cost about $120 million, was completed 26 years ago. It still looks like it's in great shape. But one of the things that happened as a result of that was, prior to that, the House had its budget, the Senate had its budget, the governor's office had its budget, and Public Works had its budget. Nobody managed the building, so it was being divided. When we started working on the project, there were about, 357 rooms in that volume? There were 57 originally, so just try to visualize how you take 57 rooms and get 357 in them. There were 75 air conditioning units. They kept adding, none of them came out. It was a mess. There were hearing rooms that went down staircases that had walls built. If it were any other building in the state, it would have been closed down. It was really unsafe. But it was a bipartisan effort. It went through 5 biennial budgets, changes of governors, changes of parties, and the vision was always to do a restoration, a 100-year restoration, so it wouldn't have to be done again. But now there is a capital Square Review and Advisory Board that manages this 10-acre site. There is a parking garage beneath us, which provides a lot of the revenue for maintaining the building. Oh yeah, they were separate too, and they kept the money. So they also control what happens on the grounds. And one of the things that has taken place is this is the first memorial that's been added in decades. And it's a Holocaust memorial. And I'll tell you, it's really tough to add something to the grounds now. And part of the idea was you wouldn't just do it for a governor and it appears on, the idea is you take 50 years and you think about history before you do something permanent. And even so, it's controversial when they add anything. So most of what is on the grounds, the other newer memorial is on the backside. And again, I'm sorry, 2 days ago, it had 88 flags out for Veterans Day. And usually they keep them up, but they took them down, which is kind of sad. It changes the look of it. But what we're going to do is look at a couple of the other monuments, and then we'll go in the building so you can take a look at the building. And again, it's a building open to the public. 100,000 school kids a year come, and they actually have a visitor center, which they never had before. They never had restrooms kids could use or visitors. But it's a pretty special building. And as you remember, we were standing over there. It is considered the center of Ohio. Okay, this is referred to as the Jules Monument. And it dates from the late 19th century, about 1892. And it has lots of men around it, and they are all Ohioans that served either as generals or as president or as Secretary of War, all around the Civil War period. And the woman at the top, the story is, it's Cordelia from I guess it's a Roman story, yeah. That these wealthy Roman women were showing off their riches, and one of them said, where are yours? And she came back with her sons and said, these are my jewels. And that hence the name of this particular monument. So if you look around at Sheridan and Grant, and well, look at the names, Grant, Sherman, they were Civil War generals. What was his name? Secretary of War?
Edwin M. Stanton.
Stanton.
He's taller than he actually was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was about half that height. It was a very short man. But this is one that's been here forever. In fact, at one point, it stood out in Broad Street, right at that intersection. And kind of when cars came along and there was more traffic, it was moved to the grounds. The other one I want to point out to you is Peace. And it's interesting because it was one actually commissioned by women instead of just soldiers and war and everything else. This sculpture's called Peace. And although it was commissioned in 1923, you might think it was about World War I. It actually was commemorating the Civil War. And that's because at that period, nearly all the Civil War veterans were dying out. I read something recently, 135 veterans from World War II die every day. So we're getting to the point where there won't be any. So there was kind of this resurgence of commemoration around this time period. And I kind of love the fact that the women talked about peace instead of celebrating war, kind of a different take on it. I will also, if you look across the street, you see the statue of a man. That happens to be Governor Jim Rhodes. And anybody from Ohio knows 1970, 4 dead at Kent State. He was the governor at the time who sent the National Guard to Kent State University, and they fired on students who were protesting in 4 dead. Remember the song 4 Dead in Ohio? That was on the State House grounds. And I'm happy to say all the people working on the project to restore the building, they got it moved because that's called the Rhodes Office Tower. It's like, get them off the State House, put them over there. This was just part of the State House grounds before the restoration. And because this 3rd Street entrance is actually used as the main visitor entrance into the building, there was a decision to do something with this space. So this memorial plaza, it's Veterans Memorial Plaza, was created, and the people of Ohio were asked to send letters to be considered, and they received about 1,500 letters from people from various conflicts. And I'll tell you, if you read them, it's kind of like the Veterans Museum, the view of being one of those people and one of those families. It makes it very, very personal what war and conflict does. So one is a birthday. This one is writing to a soon-to-be 8-year-old, and he was killed right after that. So, you know, these things that people hold on to as memories of people and experiences. So it's, if you read them all, and it's on both sides, there, as we walk toward the entrance, you'll notice in the stone, it has the names of all the counties of Ohio. There are 88 counties in Ohio, and last weekend there were 88 American flags in this plaza area. I'm sorry they don't keep them up all the time, but I was kind of hoping, since it was just yesterday was, you know, a holiday, that they would have kept them up so you can see it, because it changes the feel of this space to have the flags. So we're going to go in this building. This part of the building, this annex, was actually built as the Judiciary Annex. So the Supreme Court was originally in the main building. In 1900, the Judiciary Annex was built. It fell into disrepair. The Supreme Court moved into the Rhodes Tower when that was completed and outgrew that space and then moved to the riverfront. So it's their fourth home. There was a move to get rid of this building. It was vacant for many years, to demolish it. It's now where the Senate members have their offices. The members of the House are across the street. They go through a tunnel through the parking garage across the street to the high rise where I said there was, there were theaters and art gallery. So this was part of the restoration of the building. And what happened was this restoration took place in phases. The first phase was to complete this building, to get senators out of the building in here, to get the House members out of the building into the building across the street. They closed down the State House, the main part of the State House, for several years, and the House members met in what became the Supreme Court room in the building we were just in. So it took a lot of moving to keep government, and we have a full-time legislature. It's not like they meet for 12 weeks a year, although they do take a lot of breaks, but it does go year-round. We are actually located in a space. This was the Judiciary Annex, and that's the foundation that we just walked through. That's the State House and the foundation. This is a newly created space with an atrium above as part of the restoration. One of the things to notice when you're here is this building was built starting in the 1830s. It is built the way buildings were built for millennia, which is you just pile stones on top of each other and it's all load bearing. And they're vaulted spaces because vaulted spaces are structurally a very sound way to create big open spaces. If you've ever been to the Pantheon in Rome or places, you can do that. One of the challenges and this was basically basement space hung with all kinds, it had a garage in it, it had all the ductwork. Yeah, washed state cars. If the President of the United States came to visit Ohio at that time, they would have come into this garage space. Now they actually have a secure entrance beneath this, so anybody can come in securely and come up through the building. But one of the challenges during the restoration was, what do you do? Where do you hide utilities in a solidly stone building? And the architecture team was brilliant because they used found spaces. And when you get upstairs, we'll show you how it was designed. But this is one of, I think, the most wonderful buildings in Ohio because of its age, the design, how intact it is. and the fact that it's a public building. This building, although it looks very compatible from the exterior, it happened to be built during a time when they actually made neoclassical architecture. It's built of the same stone from the same quarry. The difference is that's a steel frame building with stone added to it. So when we walk into that space, that's going to be under the rotunda. When we walk through those walls, those were the load-bearing walls. And you'll notice these upside down arches. When we get up to the atrium, you'll see that's where the stone columns are. Those are relieving arches that are spreading the load of that column so it doesn't bear on one point. Arches are such stable structural units. So uncovering a lot of that.
Did you mention this? When the building opened in the late 1850s, it had central heat, steam heat.
Oh, yeah.
They were delighted that in January the building was at 60 degrees, so it was pleased as much. In addition, it had flush toilets from the very beginning, niches in the stone around the.
They collected water in tanks from the roof.
There were tanks, and there one's still in place over the east and west porches.
Yeah,
Big
we'll go out there.
Riveted iron tanks. There was steam heat to keep them from freezing, and water came off the roof when it rained, filled these, and then there was an overflow when they were full. And they had flushing toilets the whole time they were using the building.
The other thing is this is new space because of so many visitors coming, particularly school groups. And one of the architects had the idea to do this map, and we're like, really? With all those different colors of marble? Well, we have been in here so many times when a whole bus of kids is trying to stand on the one county that they come from. But so it has the shop, but this level is really the visitor center, and then they take people on tours from here. But sometimes they just come in to learn how government works. And if you come in, there are galleries where you can sit and watch the House and Senate in session. So it is a public building, it's open, and people should take advantage of it. And a lot of groups do, but I think a whole lot of the general public just doesn't realize these are public buildings where you can actually watch government in action. So those walls held up the portico. These are the walls of the building. And what they found was the space in between was where they could run a lot of systems, and not because you just can't be going through these walls constantly trying to put modern systems in. It was a parking garage for like dignitaries. It was a lot of systems. I mean, there were all kinds of heating, and they had a little cafeteria down here. And they still have the cafeteria, but I think it's closed right now. This space just gives you an idea of the power of this type of architecture when you realize these vaults are basically holding up the entire building. And it was such a surprise because there was so much stuff infilled here. I remember coming through after they cleared everything out. There was literally a dirt floor. It had been used as stables too at one point. And it almost felt like you were in a catacomb or something. You had no idea you were in this building because it was just so raw and nobody had seen it that way for so long. The building was designed to have 4 light wells so that all the rooms in this building had natural light, which of course in the 1830s, you had to have natural light. Later, gas light was added, and then of course they added electricity. So it went through all these iterations. One of the things that worked so well with those light wells, it became vertical transportation. So where do you put an elevator in a building built like this? Thank God there were light wells. So we're gonna go and take one of those elevators so you can just kind of see how that works. This stone actually comes from the state hospital that was on the hilltop. It was called the Hospital for the Insane. It had a lovely, that's what it was.
When that was a clinical term.
Yeah, so it was torn down. And oh, okay, the elevator's closed. We're gonna walk. Well, you can see the elevator. It looks like they're working on it. This building is built of Columbus limestone, and it was actually quarried. If you're from Columbus, it's under where Interstate 70 is on the west side, near where the state hospital was located. And if you look at it, it's highly fossilized. It's not like real smooth-grained Indiana limestone. You can see fossils all over this. These are the original exterior walls of the building. These were the light wells. They were open to the sky, and they provided light to all of the offices. When the restoration started, there were about 6 levels of infill here, so nobody actually knew what the space looked like. But it was open space, that elevators, and these, of course, are fire rated because it's all stone. And these, I don't think you can see. At any rate, there are little corners that kind of pop out here with a walkway along it, and that's where the restrooms were. They were actually located outside the building because this was open to the air. Right. And it kind of looked like those balconies. They were stone and cantilevered, but you can't really see it from here. We're going to go from here into the rotunda. Sounds like an event. Oh, shoot. Well, we won't be able to go through that. The rotunda does not have great acoustics because of its shape, but so this is the central organizing principle of the building, and then it has 2 wings with 4 light wells. And the House chambers are a 2-story space on this side. The Senate chambers, 2-story. Originally, the Supreme Court had 2 stories, and the State Library. So there were 4 2-story spaces. All of them, the ones on this side of the building, had been subdivided. Those stayed that way. But the House and Senate chambers have been restored to what they would have looked like at the time the building was completed. There were historic photos to help with. These are reproduction light fixtures. They look like gas fixtures that were in the building. You see the little cock at the bottom, which was how you turned the gas on. The skylight was gone, but there was a description in an 1870 newspaper describing the rays and everything with the little seal in the middle. But the framework was all there that matched it exactly. And when you look at history, if you look at that state seal, it has a canal boat in it. And canals were only in use for a very short time. So that was like that snapshot in time of when that was the state seal. I wanted to point out some of the artwork because it's original to this space. One is the Vicksburg Monument. It actually had been disassembled and was spread around the building. This is where it was originally. So the Lincoln had been taken off. The Vicksburg was actually sliced and parts of it were in the building. That was restored, and it was another one of those ones where people of Ohio raised the money, right? And this was during the Civil War and the Battle of Vicksburg. This is Perry's Victory. And believe it or not, it was designed for that space. It doesn't fit it, but it was designed for it. And then there are also large paintings, where, again, history of Ohio. And these were put in over time. To restore those, they were too big to get out of the building. So during the restoration, they actually built a room in the center of the floor and put the artwork in it and restored it in that space because there was no way to have it here when all this construction was going on. And then they were rehung. But this is a really, it's a beautiful space. If you look at the floor, Every single row is a different size. You could do it with a computer today, but they did not do it with a computer, and it's beautiful when you see it from above. But the original governor's office, there's still a ceremonial governor's office there. So for official duties or guests or whatever, he uses that office. He's actually over across the street. And I mentioned that the senators are in that building, and there's an atrium between them, and it looks like they're having an event today. That was open space. And this is not good for events because the acoustics are terrible in here. So that space was created from no space, but it used to be because people would run back and forth between the State House and the Judiciary Annex, and it was always known as Pigeon Alley because pigeons would just roost there. And the Ohio Historical Society, there's actually a stuffed pigeon above that door that's there, and people who've been around the State House know what that is. What we're going to do is just go back down over, and we'll take you up into that space, the main lobby staircase area of that building, just to show you some of the Ohio history that's incorporated into light fixtures and doorknobs, and another one of those very detailed buildings. This is the part of the building that was scheduled for demolition for probably 15 years. And other than cleaning it up, it's all original material. So this was completed in 1902, I believe. And one of the things that's interesting about it is how the state seal's incorporated, and all of the doorknobs have the state seal on it. So I don't know what that allegory is up there. Even when we were researching the building, we have no idea. It was a Cincinnati artist. The skylight is original. It was covered over with plywood. Nobody knew it was up there. So, oh, yeah, yes, actually. So you'll notice this design throughout the building. And there was a library that the whole thing looked like this Greek key, but it also could look like a Nazi symbol. So when they uncovered it and was like, how do we go to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate? One of the things we had to do was research how it was used in different cultures. And really, until the Nazis, there were cultures all over the world that used this same design that meant different things. And once actually the politicians, because you never know, they could just decide to take everything up. Once they looked at it and they said, okay, well, it's historical. It's, that doesn't mean we're Nazis. But there are things like that happen where context and something that has a meaning at one time has a meaning at another. And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with. But if politicians could accept reality and truth and just say, okay, fine, nobody's ever said anything about it, but it was a cause of great concern. It's used throughout the building, as you can see. Everything here was researched, so all the decorative painting was under layers of paint. The light fixtures were all here. All the marble was darker than this. It was a dark brown because people smoked in the building. They used coal heating in the building. And it was amazing. They just put some different cleaning materials on, and all of a sudden it was like it's white marble. Who would have guessed? So this is a building that we're proud of because it was done so carefully, and it will be maintained this way forever. It's 25 years after the restoration, and nothing has been undone. Oh, interesting story. It was a competition. There was a first, second, and third place. The first place was Thomas Cole, who's the Hudson River Valley painter, who's from Ohio. Parts of the design were his. So there was never, what they did was they took all the designs and kind of redid them. And then during the years, there were, 7 different architects that worked on it because they'd have money to do something, and then they didn't. So there was never a complete set of drawings for this building. At best, what we found were bits and pieces, or a room detailed, or furniture detailed. The Judiciary Annex, was the complete opposite, a complete set of drawings down to the furniture because the Supreme Court justices had offices, down to the furniture in their offices, including a fainting couch with fringe. Go figure.
And we should point out too that the barrel, the rotunda above the rotunda, never had a dome because
No.
it never was intended to have one. The design was before the era of the dome.
Yeah. So people always thought, it was just they ran out of money and it should have a dome, but
This
It was
is pretty
designed.
open there. We can probably
yeah.
people are just standing around.
Yeah, I kind of. Well, if you want to go, just take a look. That's all new, and the stone in there was actually quarried here in Columbus. So it's Columbus limestone for all the new parts. So this is all new, the two ends, and it's the same limestone. And you can see down below where those arches were, they were holding up these giant columns.
That's right.
But they needed a gathering event space, and the ceiling's all acoustical tiles, so it has better. Oh, the other thing they did, this is a National Historic Landmark, and there were a lot of people who thought, in fact, it was quite controversial to enclose this space. So the architects designed it. It's freestanding. The only place it touches the building is that glass. So everything here bears on what's below. And they said if anybody decided later to take it out, the only thing they would do is they turn 4 windows into doors.
So
But-
to either side, the vertical walls, you see the columns, those are all original
Yeah.
when the buildings were built.
These are
They
the
opened
original
up a
exterior.
quarry south of the city to get the same limestone to do the stone structure of this atrium, which is self-supporting.
Yeah. And the architects were so intentional about hiding all the systems. So you see this design, that's actually the heating cooling system. It's all integrated into details as opposed to seeing anything. The technology, you don't see any of it. It's all hidden in the building. And the idea was that you could walk in and feel like it was a historic building that was being restored and not have a lot of stuff added, as it did over years and as you frequently see it being done.